Hello, everyone. Today we are joined by two very distinguished guests that are visiting Guatemala and UFM from a very long way to come to share to us their ideas about free markets and democracy. Talking about Arpita Nepal, who is the co-founder and director of research and development of Samriddhi, the Prosperity Foundation of Nepal. And she's joined as well by her husband, Robin Sitoula, who's also a co-founder of Samriddhi, and he's the executive director of the organization. Robin, Arpita, welcome to UFM. It's a privilege to have you here. Robin, let's start with you. Can you please talk to us about, can you describe the political system in Nepal, the political form that has shaped your country in the past few years?
Well, I mean, I think it would not be justice to talk about Nepali political system without having a bit of Nepali political history. So if you look at Nepal from a political history perspective, for about more than 300 years, we've been an independent sovereign country. Well, we've been a sovereign country forever, but our modern political history dates back to about 300 years. And in the last 300 years, we've had monarchs and oligarchs and democracy and all this form. But our history of democracy and modern politics begins in 1950, when we got our what we call the first wave of democracy. We were democratized for a short span of time, for about 10 years, and then we had an active monarch take over democracy and implement an absolute no-party system. And then in 1990, which is about 30 years later, we had a revolution, the global wave and revolution, and so we had democracy again. And then in 1995, while we still had democracy, some of the political parties, mostly inclined to communist ideas, were not happy about how the things were going, and so they took up to a revolution, as they called it, which is basically a guerrilla warfare to establish the authority of the feudals and authority of the proletates, and in their own way, language. And so we had a kind of a guerrilla civil war for about 10 years, starting 1995 until 2006. And then in 2006, we kind of came into a peace process, and so we restored democracy, as in we restored political freedom, and then we used to be a Hindu kingdom, we became a secular country, we became a republican, we used to be a unitary country, we became a federal country. So many changes, in between in 2006, 7, and 8. And then part of the deal was to also write a new constitution. So we're right now in the process of making a new constitution, or writing or putting together a new constitution, which is actually due a couple of days. It's supposed to be released on the 22nd of January, but probably will still be in Guatemala if it gets released. But to sum it up, currently we have a democratic system, where we have a good political freedom and good sort of civil liberties. It's a federal republic and a secular state. So that's the kind of political situation of the country.
Arpita, with this context, can you tell us about how is Samriddhi born? How is the Prosperity Foundation comes about, and why free markets and democracy?
So a couple of things, like Robin mentioned, in 2006, when the Maoists entered into the peace process, and we were on the process of institutionalizing a lot of our political freedoms and civil liberties, the conversation, I think, left out a very important aspect of democracy. A democracy can only be strengthened if you have both political freedoms and economic freedoms. And the conversation about economic freedom was lacking, and therefore the idea of Samriddhi, the Prosperity Foundation. Another context that was also going on was the conversation in Nepal had always revolved around poverty. And so we wanted to put it in people's imaginations that we can be rich with the right institutions to support us. Prosperity is possible in Nepal with sound ideas. And therefore, we named our foundation the Prosperity Foundation, because we wanted to switch that conversation. So, if you look at it on why Samriddhi, I would see it from two different perspectives. One is to institutionalize democratic, different functions and make sure that democracy is sustainable in the long run. Because if the democracy doesn't deliver, then we can have endless number of revolutions, as we have seen in our history. So that's one aspect of it, while the second aspect is really starting a conversation about how can a democracy deliver in terms of economic growth and prosperity for everyone.
Robin, what are the challenges for Nepal to have an open economy? What policies do you think must be implemented in order to achieve this?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting question to look at, because Nepal has been, for some time, people view Nepal as a, sort of a fairly liberal economy in comparison to other countries in our region, mostly in South Asia. But then that was a momentary thing that happened in the beginning of 1990s, where we tried liberalizing the market a little bit. But then, again, it started going down. So as of now, if you look at Nepal, there are a couple of characteristics that does not, or that kind of prove that Nepal is not a very open or a liberal economy. For example, there are a lot of tariffs and barriers, and it's not easy to bring in goods or export goods. On both ways, it's difficult. One, two. It's not very easy to enter the market for anybody else, because it's not because of the laws as such, but then it's a very heavily cartel country. So every single sector you need to enter has a lot of cartels at one side, while at the other side there are endless number of regulations you have to comply with, and licenses, and so it's very difficult to participate in the economy for people, and a lot of people are still in the informal economy, and that's part one of the problem. Part two of the problem, which is always good to start with, a good thing, is Nepal is a country of opportunities, like Guatemala is, for example. A lot of countries have all the resources required to become prosperous, but despite all the opportunity, the natural condition that you have, the natural resources that you have, the human resources that you have, a lot of countries fail to realize that it requires enabling policy climate and institutions to transform those opportunities into real prosperity. And I think Nepal lacks that very much. Some of the key challenges I would think as one, I think our political culture is very statist and very nannying kind of a culture, which I think is a very old thinking. I would think, very old school, like maybe 100-year-old school, where people still try to think that development is in the hands of the government and the state can do it. Whereas it has already been proved elsewhere that the state does not have the capacity to do the real development. However, they might have the capacity to create that facilitating environment. So the challenge is, from a perspective of a state should be a doer to a state should be a facilitator for growth, is I think one important shift in terms of mentality that we need to bring about in the public arena and in the political arena. Also, with that mentality, we need to sift away a lot of our policies, because we have endless number of policies that are outdated or are not required at all. These are policies probably must have been written in the whims of people who, might have thought this could be an interesting policy. So we have to cut down on a lot of policies and maybe probably create a good museum for policies that used to exist in Nepal, and have the right set of policies that enable open markets and enable open economy, so that every single person can participate in the economy, contribute to the well-being of others, are able to pay a tolerable amount of tax or service fee to the state for providing whatever services is required to create this, and create jobs and opportunities for many other people in Nepal.
Arpita, what has been the role of your foundation in overcoming these challenges? How has the Prosperity Foundation impacted positively in obtaining some of these goals?
So I think our approach is sort of three-pronged. Firstly, we work a lot on education and training. So we work a lot with young people, helping them realize why entrepreneurship is important, why entrepreneurs are the basis of wealth creation in a society, and what kind of a policy environment actually helps promote entrepreneurship. So that's one of the functions that we do. The second is we use a lot of research and publication, because we believe that if you start building a culture of evidence-based policy, you look around the world what has worked and what hasn't. And you also try and analyze Nepal's situation and try and figure out what would work in Nepal, irrespective of, what school of thought that belongs to or anything as such. So that's the sort of public policy discourse that we bring into the public. So that's our second contribution. And thirdly, we work a lot on public outreach and advocacy. So for example, we run a very, very successful campaign called Gari Khana Deu in Nepali, which basically translates to "Let me earn my living" in English. And it fights for three fundamentals that we would like to be enshrined in the Constitution. Firstly, the rule of law. Secondly, the safety of life and property. And thirdly, the freedom to enterprise. With these three sort of fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution, we believe that Nepal can truly head towards becoming a prosperous society. So, in terms of what we do as a foundation is largely under these three banners. What we essentially do is try and contribute to the public discourse and enrich the public discourse with ideas that have worked from around the world. That's what we do.
On that thought, you've come from a long way. There's 1,000 kilometers separating Nepal from Guatemala. Yet on the brief time that you've been here, you've seen a lot of similarities with your country, and you've shared with some people about this. Can you, just to conclude, what do you think is the main importance of ideas, particularly those ideas of free markets and liberty in general?
In general, I think everything about free markets and liberty, and why I certainly believe in the movement, is because I think it helps unleash the potentials of individuals. And at the end of the day, a free society can grow wealthy, prosperous, and happy only when individuals can freely interact with one another and freely actually pursue their own interest. So therefore, I think it's very, very important for any kind of society that aspires to be a free society to protect its liberty.
Robin, any final thoughts?
The ideas of freedom have always been fascinating to me, and I think it's a way of life, and it's by far, I think it is the best proven idea. It has worked everywhere else, and I do believe that it will work for Guatemala, it will work for Nepal, it will work for the whole of humanity, and this is an idea which is not coercive, which does not force you to do anything, only pledges you also not to force anything onto others, and it's a responsible way of life. So I think it's a very liberating and dignified way of life. So I therefore am a part of the ideas, and I live those ideas.
Well, Arpita, Robin, on behalf of UFM, I thank you very much for being here and for sharing your experience, a very interesting experience from somewhere very far away from Guatemala, but still letting us know that the ideas of liberty and free markets are something that are worth fighting for. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.